Lord. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending upon what time you are watching your midweek Bible study review. I have missed you guys, but we had some really great fun on last Sunday evening. What an awesome time we had in God to really fellowship. If you missed out, you weren't here for the family game night. Those of you that know, the vision and mission here at Renew Worship Center is that we are a family of believers building the empire of Christ. So on last Sunday, we had an awesome time on family game night. Win, lose, or draw was amazing. The claws really came out. I mean, some of you men and women are really competitive, but it was great. I love the Bible trivia, the messages, the impromptu things that we've done. The food was outrageously good. I ate way too much, but I know God is going to help us. Not to mention, Sister Debbie Brown was the lead on that, so a tip of the hat to her and all of her efforts with her team that supported in bringing that event together. To the men that grilled or purchased food, it was great. It was awesome. I love you guys, and I can't think of a better place to have fun in God. So on last week, we left off in Genesis chapter 18, somewhere around the 17th verse. And if you recall, around 2 weeks ago, the last segment that we did with Abraham, if you remember that Abraham has just now is now showing the sign of the covenant of God in his body and the promise that God is going to give him a son. And around beginning of Genesis chapter 18, Abraham, as we left off with on last week, Abraham was just visited by the angel of the Lord, God himself in a bodily form with two other angels. And it's in this conversation and exchange that God begins to deal with Sarah, who's listening in the background, and telling her that you're going to have a son out of your own body. And it's at that moment, as we discussed 2 weeks ago, that the idea of pleasure for Sarah was beginning to become a little bit doubtful. And she says, shall I now have pleasure now that I'm old? And so 2 weeks ago, we really began to study what it means to be pleasured and what it means to have pleasure and how God has created our mind with reward pathways that give us a feeling and a sense of pleasure at times when we are doing something that promotes life. If you're having a child, dopamine, as we discussed, and oxytocin are released. If you're engaging in sex with your spouse, dopamine is released, oxytocin is released. Not only that, but if you're working out in the gym, you're going to have a release of dopamine. If you're doing any achievement, if you achieve something that you set as a goal and you achieve it through hard work, then you're going to get a feeling of happiness. And that's what we discussed on last week. So even in that, Sarah is saying that something about my pleasure isn't lining up. Now, this is strategic because where we're going to see in the rest of Genesis chapter 19 is the idea of pleasure comes up again. And so here, Sarah is now saying, no, I don't think this is going to be pleasurable. And she's needing God to change that in her. As we even learn that God is changing what we find pleasurable. And so as the story continues, Abraham is sitting having this meal, watching the God of all gods in a bodily form eat what he's presented to him. When they're finished eating, they arrive, they get up, they begin to head towards Sodom and Gomorrah. But the world is all clamoring that Sodom and Gomorrah is not at all what God had intended. So now God is saying, I'm going to go send destruction if I find that this is true. Now we all know that God doesn't have to visit us on the earth in order to know whether we're doing what we're supposed to be doing or what we're not supposed to be doing. He knows it already. And so, but it's more specifically, he decides to make an appearance because there's something about himself that he wants us to notice. And so that's exactly what Abraham is finding out, that God, you didn't have to come here to know what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, but maybe by chance you came for me to have an opportunity to say, God, please don't destroy the righteous with the wicked. More specifically, he's saying, God, you know my nephew Lot is down there, and if there are just 40 or 50 or 35, and he begins to really ask God, if there are just 10, he negotiates all the way down to 10. If you find 10 righteous, would you spare that nation? And so God says, of course, I won't do that. I will spare them. And this is the moment that Abraham begins to intercede. Now, when the angels arrive and God departs from Abraham and the angels, the two angels that were with him have now arrived at Sodom and Gomorrah, they find that when they get to the city gates, that Lot is sitting in the gates. Now, I know you're saying, what's the big deal? But remember this. Do you remember when Abraham and Lot separated, when Abraham's name was Abram and their herdsmen were arguing and Lot separated and and he went towards the plains of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then in the next chapter, you find that now he was pitching his tent near Sodom and Gomorrah and turned it facing Sodom and Gomorrah. And then we find that the chapters after that now he's living in Sodom and Gomorrah, and then he's held captive because of a huge war that broke out between the 4 and the 5 kings, the Babylonian Empire versus the Sodom and Gomorrah empires. They began to fight. Lot is taken captive. Abraham goes to rescue him. Then we realize that even now Lot is back living in Sodom and Gomorrah, and not only just living there, but now he's sitting in the gates of the city, which means that he has an authoritative position as a judge or a councilman that hears what's going on in the city. And so not only is he back living there, and he's missed the opportunity to be circumcised, he's not in the household of Abraham where circumcision was happening to everybody that was with him. Now he is living as a ruler in Sodom and Gomorrah. And so this is where the angels walk up to the city, and they see Lot, and Lot identifies. This is not his first encounter with angels of God. It's not his first encounter with seeing how Abraham would treat those individuals and the angels of the Lord when they visit. So Lot immediately tells the angels, please come stay with me. Don't go to the city square. Don't be in the midst of everybody. Come, let me keep you safe. Let me feed you, and then you guys can go on your way. And so the angels, after much hesitancy, decide to go ahead and stay with Lot. And when they arrive, and he prepares a meal just as Abraham had prepared a meal for them earlier. He feeds them, and they're getting ready to go to bed. And then the word of God says in Genesis chapter 18 that all of the men from all over the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, every quadrant, it says, the men began to come to Lot's house and demand that Lot give them the 2 men that have just arrived in his home. And so Lot is terrified. He knows that these are holy men of some sort. They're sent by God in some way, and they received protection from him. And so at this moment of panic, the men are saying, give us those men that we can know them carnally. And more specifically, what they're saying is, give us those men so we can sleep with them. We want to have sex with those men. Bring them out to us right now. And so Lot is like, please don't do this. Please don't do this. Take my virgin daughters instead. Now, this is when it gets kind of interesting, because we learn that later in the same chapter that, number one, Lot's daughters are not virgins. As a matter of fact, they have husbands, both of them. But at that time, you see that Lot is trying to make the best decision that he can under a lot of pressure. And not only pressure, but he's thinking that this is a good idea. Like, yeah, take my daughters right here. They're in the house. Sleep with them. Do whatever you want to do with them. So you're willing to give up your daughters, number one, and 2 other men's wives just to save yourself? Shouldn't you have said, take me. Don't hurt anybody in my family. Don't hurt my daughters. But you see at this moment that even Lot's best decision is still so wrong. And this is when we realize that there are times that, based off of our influences, based who we are around, because of where we are, our setting and our surrounding, that there are times that even the best decisions that we make when we're trying to do the right thing, that because we have been inundated with so much foolishness all around us, that even our best decisions turn out to be so far from the mark that God has really set for us. And so the men that are banging on his door say, no. Either give us those men that are in your house, or we're going to do to you much harder than what we intended to do to them. And so they began to press all the more against Lot. Some scholars believe that pressing is an attempted rape. Others say that they were just forcefully pressing him against the door. But regardless of what happened exactly at that moment, what is obvious is that sin has completely become a common practice. That this idea that you can sleep with any person, any male that comes into the city, is a widespread idea in this entire city. Both the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, they all believe that if somebody walks into our city, we have free right to have sex with them, whether they're male or female, anytime we feel like it. And more than that, they began to tell Lot, they say, and who are you to judge us? Oh, can you see that we are living in those times? And you're thinking, no. Nobody's just running around banging on people's doors. Give us the people that live there. No, not necessarily. But what we do find is that this sin, this idea, this worldview that you can sleep with whoever you want and whenever you want, regardless of what they say, that worldview was so thoroughly embedded in the minds of Sodom and Gomorrah people that now it's blatant and it's obvious in every town, every neighborhood, every village that's in those 2 cities believes and acts the same way. because every man came from every quadrant. You're thinking, what does that mean? But listen clearly, this is exactly where we are living. You're saying, but that's not how we live. It's not just the homosexuality or men sleeping with men or women sleeping with women. That's not the issue. What the real issue is, in addition to that, is that this sin is so blatantly obvious. And if you look at our society, sin is so obvious that the standards that God has is here, and where we line up is way down here, and we flaunt it. On last week, we discussed that you can see all in our newspapers, on our televisions, on our internets, on our websites, on Palm Pilots, and the overindulgence in pornography, or the indulgence in any type of pornography, swinging in marriages, and all of these things, and all of this sex, and even now kids and teens sending selfies of themselves and certain body parts, and all of this stuff is just so obvious, where it's nothing to see a woman on a TV ad in her underwear. Back in the day, that would never be thought of, but now put on your underwear, put on a swimsuit, do some kind of provocative pose or whatever it takes to sell. And that idea is everywhere we look. It's everywhere. Sex sells, they say, and we are inundated with it. And it's blatant and it's obvious. And if you dare speak up against it, if you dare say, I don't think this is the standard that God has, I don't think that this is the standard that God has, if you utter to anybody that you will not succumb to that, they will say to you, who are you to judge us? I'm not trying to judge you. I'm just saying, as for me and those in my house, we don't want to do this. Oh, you think you're so... I mean, you've heard these conversations before. So this is the setting and the surrounding that Lot is living in. And it's at this moment that the men continue to press and bang on the door. Let us in, give us those men. And it's at that time that as they hard press against Lot, the scriptures say that the angels that were in his home open the door, snatch him, bring him in, shut the door, and then strike the men with blindness. And the word of God goes on to say that the men grew weary of looking for the door. Did you hear that? I mean, seriously, they grew weary. Now, this is interesting because we discussed, if I'm trying to get in somebody's house to do something I shouldn't be doing, and then all of a sudden I'm struck with blindness, oh, I can't see, I don't think I would still be trying to get in the house. Do you really have to have it that bad that you're willing, that even though you're blind, I would be like, oh my God, I can't see, Jesus, help me, somebody, please help me. And I'll fall to my knees and cry out to God. But no, these men aren't doing any of that. All they can think about is how bad they have to have what they have to have. Oh, you're thinking, whoo, that's a mess. But have we not been there from time to time? Where the whole time you're thinking, God, you're thinking how much you want what you want. And God is trying to stop that from happening. Like you pick up your phone, I'm going to call, and then the phone doesn't work. And you pick up another phone, I'm going to call, and it doesn't work. And I'm going to drive by, and your car won't start. I'm going to keep asking, and you won't get that job. But I'm going to try this and try that. And at every turn, God keeps trying to say, no. But you are so blinded by what you want, more so than what God is trying to stop from happening to you. So we've been there before. We can see that there are times there are our own selfish desires. And if we're not careful, it's those reward pathways that we have made so strong that we want that pleasure so bad that we don't even realize that we are in danger. As a matter of fact, God has created in our mind that those reward pathways, based on the amount of dopamine that's released in our brain, that it signifies what priority we should place those things. That this becomes a top priority because of how much dopamine is released, and this becomes a second priority. So if your reward pathways have been hijacked in your mind, like in the case of these men that are banging on the door, all they know is sex with some unknown man is so good to us that priority has lifted from number 5. That now is a top priority, that I don't even care that I am blind. I don't even care that I don't know where I'm going. The priority I have right now is trying to get that pleasure met. We see the same thing in drug addiction, alcohol addiction, sexual addictions. We see it in addiction to pornography. We see that because of those high releases of dopamine that our priorities begin to change. That's why that's why we know it's an addiction, because you were willing to lose your life to continue to have that living now becomes a bottom priority to experiencing the pleasure. Oh my goodness. And so that's exactly what's happening to the men of Sodom. This is how bad it has gotten, that now you're willing to be blind and you don't even care that you can't see, and that you're going to lose your ability to live as you would normally live just for the sake of feeling pleasure again, just for that release. Oh my goodness. You're thinking, man, that's really messed up. But there are times that we play with our own physical bodies in the same way, that for an opportunity to have pleasure at some point we'll risk changing and altering our whole life, whether it's children outside of wedlock, whether it's some type of disease or anything of that nature. We're willing to risk it all because we have got to have that pleasure that we think we need so desperately. That's why God has been challenging us, even on last week and more this week, that he wants to change what we think is pleasurable. And so in the story, the men are now blind and they grow weary from looking for the door, and they begin to dissipate into the towns and into the cities that they came from. And it's at that moment that the angels tell Lot, you need to go find every family member, everybody that's connected to you, and get out of Dodge. And so they try to, and Lot goes to the first house he goes to, the first individuals he speaks to are his own sons-in-laws. I mean, didn't he just say they were virgins? His wives were virgins. I mean, his daughters were virgins, but they weren't. So he goes to speak to his sons-in-laws, and he tells his sons-in-law, listen, God is getting ready to destroy this nation, this city. Let's get out of here, pack up your stuff, let's go. And his sons-in-laws look at him and start laughing because they think he is joking. Oh my goodness. Do you see what kind of problem that how we live and where we live, that even when we're not aware, it begins to weaken our ability to trust God? That if we're not careful, if we're not really tuned into what God is saying, that our very surroundings weaken our ability for people to identify the God that is in us. I mean, we should all strive to live. Don't you think that even our friends and families that are in our lives, that if we say, oh my goodness, God is dealing with me, that they go, oh my goodness, he probably is, because you're saved. But instead we try to not be so saved and not be so fanatical and not be so radical. Oh, that's foolishness. Be radical for God. Make sure that everybody knows that you love God and you love him with your whole heart. And they need to have a serious respect for the man or woman of God that's in their presence, because when you say something is of God, they can look at you and your life and identify that you are not joking. So, of course, you know how the story goes. At the end of this story, those sons-in-laws don't go with Lot. And because he was not living a lifestyle in their viewpoint, in their eyes, that showed that he had a real relationship with God, they died. How many people in our workplace that we cater to the jokes? We may not send those jokes, but we laugh when they're stated. How many friends on Facebook and Twitter that even though we didn't generate that picture or that particular joke, we'll share it. And so now when you really try to say something, really saved, for sure saved, I love God and he did this for me. Now people can even think that you are joking because just last 5 minutes ago, you just tweeted some picture of somebody's butt. Do you understand what I'm saying? It just can get a little too much. And so here we find that even now, Lot returns back home, and now it's the next morning, and the angels wake him up. They say, get up, get your people, get your family, and get out of here. And so the scriptures say that Lot is starting to move, and he's moving very slowly. And it says that he's lingering to leave. And here you find that the angels snatch Lot, his wife, and his daughters, and drag them out of the city. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine that? Being snatched and dragged out of any situation is never pleasurable. And there are times, if you could even identify in our own lives, where God had to literally come, grab your arm, and snatch you out of some things. He had to deliver you by force in some cases, just to save you from destruction. And I know we don't like it because we often go, God, but why did it have to hurt so bad? But God, why did they have to go down like that? But God, why did they say this and I do this? And why did it become so nasty? Because God was so trying to show you that I'm not trying to save your feelings. I'm trying to save you from destruction. And those times are when it's difficult. Sometimes God is saying, I'm dragging you out of this place because I believe my seed of who I am is still in you. And so when they drag him out of the city, the angels tell Lot, they tell him, you go right to the mountain. Run up to the mountaintop. That's where you're going to be saved. And it's at that moment that Lot begins to negotiate to a certain extent, just like his uncle Abraham did. He's saying, please don't make me go to the mountains. If you make me go to the mountains, I might surely die. Who knows what's going to happen to me on that mountain? But let me go to this other little city, just a little ways here on the same level, the same plane. There's another city called Soar, and let me go there. And I think it's another city, and I'll be okay. And so the angels say, fine, but just hurry up and get there, because we can't do anything until you're safely there. And they tell him, don't look back. Now, this is strategic, because what you find is that same city that Lot is begging to go to, in Hebrew, is defined as a city that means that it's insignificant. It's small. And if you go back, and if you guys remember when we were studying in earlier chapters of Genesis, that Soar was part of the allies of the Babylonian Empire. That means that city fought with the Sodom and Gomorrah cities against the Babylonian Empire. Do you guys remember that? When we studied the 5 kings versus the 4 kings, and the 5 kings of the 5 kings of Sodom, Gomorrah, and Zor, those places, that is this place. Soar, Zor, the same place. That's where Lot wants to go. I mean, think about this. Now, when we looked at Lot's life, he went from with Abraham to let's go our separate ways because I got too much stuff. Do you understand what I'm saying? So I'm going to go closer to Sodom and Gomorrah. He pitches his tent in the plain near Sodom and Gomorrah. The next chapter we find that now he's living right on the edge of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he's turned his tent to face Sodom and Gomorrah. We just studied that a couple weeks ago. And then we find that he starts living in Sodom and Gomorrah by the next chapter, and then a war breaks out between the Babylonian Empire against Sodom and Gomorrah, and then Lot is taken captive by the Babylonian Empire, and then Abraham runs and rescues him, and where does Lot go? Back to Sodom and Gomorrah. And then now in chapters 18 and 19, you find that Lot is sitting as a judge in the gates of Sodom and Gomorrah. And now the angels have to snatch him out of Sodom and Gomorrah. And you would think he would say, let me run far from this place. But no, he says what we always say, please just let me have this. Let me keep this little thing. And that's exactly what he asked. He says, I just want to come to this insignificant place. God was trying to get Lot to go to a mountaintop. Did he not just deliver him from death? Couldn't the same God keep him as he's going to the mountains? But Lot saw so much more risk in going higher in God than he saw in staying on the same level. Oh my goodness. Did you hear that? Lot saw more risk in going higher in God than he saw in staying at the same level. My goodness. There are times where you and I, we find that it's more dangerous if I become radical for God. I mean, what am I going to do? Go to church all the time? What am I going to do? Read my Bible all the time? And you find what kind of friends am I going to have? I'm going to have crazy saved friends. And you find that there's more risk in going higher in God than staying at the same level. Oh, but let me tell you, because you know the rest of the story. When Lot and his wife and his daughters get to that small insignificant place that he begged and asked God to let him go to, that small city called Soar, when he finally gets there, what happens? When they arrive, his wife looks back. And in that small action of disobedience, you would think, God, why? And you know the story. When she looked back, she's turned instantly into a pillar of salt. And we all go, oh, how could God do that? I mean, seriously, all she did was look back. I mean, if it was a whole bunch of fire and brimstone raining down from heaven, I would want to look back because I'm curious. But you don't know when God says something is enough and you shouldn't do it anymore. Don't be a part of it. And you think this small little action of turning your head is nothing. But you have to remember that God kept trying to tell you, don't go there. I'm going to rescue from there. I'm going to deliver you from there. And at that moment, what God was really showing Lot is, I'm not just delivering you from Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm trying to deliver you to a higher place in me. Because Lot was with Abram when he saw that God would speak to him on a mountaintop. Lot has seen the presence of God in so many areas of his young adult life, and now rather than rushing to go to a mountaintop, he wants to stay at the same level. Now look at where Lot and his wife were. They were now in a city that men were sleeping together. Now, this is not to say this is the only sin in Sodom and Gomorrah, but it is to say that God is showing that sin specifically. Why? Because Sarah was saying, I need to find pleasure, God, in what you promised to do for me. You said you're going to give me a son. Can that be pleasurable for me? You have to change my heart. Make your promise pleasurable to me. And that's what God is working on in Sarah. But now look at Lot. Lot is living with his wife in a place where all of mankind is saying, I don't want any promises of God. I don't care about having any children of God. All I care about is pleasure. And so they're all actively, men with men and women with women, and probably more sins than that, but it's irrelevant. The point here, what God is really highlighting, is you have one couple that is trying and expecting a son of God, and in the waiting, now they're finding it won't be pleasurable, and they're saying, God, help us, change us. And then you have a whole nation of people that says, we don't want any promises. We don't want children in that vein per se. We're not concerned with fulfilling what God has called us to do. All we're concerned with is pleasure. I mean, think about it. They have the same equipment as every other nation and family. Husbands still have reproductive organs. Women still have reproductive organs. But they're choosing not to carry out the purposes of God, but rather just have pleasure. And I've said this on numerous occasions, that God loves every individual with his whole heart. He died for all of us. But I tell you one thing, that he is serious about accomplishing his will and purpose in our lives. And he tries with his whole heart to find a way to bring us closer to him. And even in this, when we find that it's difficult because of our circumstances, because of the worldview that we're living in, that even our best decisions become really crappy decisions in his eyes, he says, I want to change how you think. He says, be not conformed to this world, but be what? Ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. God always knows exactly what we need. So that was what we studied on last week. This week, we're going to finish up Genesis chapter 19. And we're going to really, hopefully, you guys, for your homework, can go into Genesis chapter 19, 20, 21, and 22. You should have already done 19. So really, you're picking up in 20 and 22. I can't wait to see you guys Saturday at 7 p.m. I love you so much, and have a great week.